One thing I want to follow up on that then is, since we have the 3 Korean teams, and as you said, okay, Damwon's the locomotive, they're kind of out in front, they're pulling the other ones with them, metaphorically in this sense. Just as I don't want people in the past to go, Europe was the best region. It's like, Europe was never the best region. G2 might have been the best team. That's a very different equation entirely. By the way, you could go and ask Fnatic, Splice, like these teams would tell you we weren't as better than fucking FPX, we weren't better than the elite level teams necessarily. So here's my question, right? If I look at the 3 Korean teams that made it this far, let's be real, who gives a fuck about Hanwha? They don't even fit in this discussion. Like, they don't actually even fit any of what you talk about with Koreans. But if I look at the 3 Korean teams, right? If I take Damwon and make them the paragon of all the good things you've said about the meta and how to play it, if I look at the other 2 teams, as a layman, the obvious way to break it down goes like this. Gen G actually seems fairly weak at what you're discussing. Like, I've seen them get to the mid game with leads and just sometimes not be able to close out. Sometimes, dude, they can't even close out when they're basically like pushing in the base. Like, they don't always even take the inhibs right or the fights right. I've seen them lose a massive fight that opened the game. I think it was against TL in the group stage. I've seen them just be too cautious and keep going back and have to take dragon after dragon or take extra fights where, you know, I actually think Damwon or someone would have just ended the game. And then if I look at T1, because of the whole faker element where they're using this weird style where it doesn't actually try to sort of dominate the lane typically, it seems like they're just about getting super far ahead in the early game. And then listen, as Rogue showed you in Europe, the easier you make the early game, in theory, you just make your decisions in the mid game a little bit like easier to make, or they've got more punch behind them, as it were. How would you contrast all 3 teams? If Damwon's the best at this stuff, where do the other 2 fit in, do you think?
I think T1 surprisingly caught up extremely fast between the end of Summer Split and now. They play a much more aggressive playstyle than Damwon, but I think that in terms of individual expression in the first 15 minutes of the game, they are like 2 ranks above Rogue, and that puts them
right.
Even, I would say individually, probably even on par, even if not above.
Maybe the best, right?
Yeah. So I think that's why the match against Team One and Damwon is so exciting, because I feel like, I would say, I don't know if it's like brain and muscle. I think that T1 is probably 60% muscle and 40% brain, and right. Damwon is probably 60% brain and 40% muscles. And this is very hard to gauge who's improved the most. I think T1 improved the most, but are they good enough? I think they are to actually give us probably one of the highest level series of all time. So I'm very I'm extremely excited about watching it. I'm extremely, because I feel like I've seen T1 fail at executing some fights that were very simple. The first example, they drafted a full poke comp in the first game against EDG, and they just all tried to get a herald like hard engaging on them, and just all died, and they lost the game out of that. And I was like, that's very questionable for a team of the caliber of T1 to do this mistake. But beside this hoopsie, they've been consistently making extremely smart plays and being able to like pull extremely good fighting situations pretty much anywhere on the map, and they seem to have a lead. Even Faker against Chovy, if you look at the first game, because they were the one where like Lissandra versus LeBlanc, so you can't really gauge players on that. But the Orianna game that Faker played was against Zoe, as far as I remember, was extremely close with Showmakers. I feel like individually every player at T1 is very, very sharp. So I think that it's very hard to compare the two, and I can't really tell you. Like I would put Damwon favorite, because that's the one that we've seen leading the whole year. Yes. So the past is gonna give that edge. Genji seems not there yet in terms of whether it's pace of the game, understanding of like fight resolution, positional advantage, division, closing out the games, as you said, like pulling the trigger. Historically, has been something that's very hard for Genji. I feel like they have players that are fearful. And fear is never a good thing. Like, you need to be very cold-minded and just analyze what you have in your plate and eat it, right? And I feel like Genji usually, if they win, they start being more careful. They're pretty aggressive in the early game, and whenever they get the lead, they try to just lock the crate, and then they don't touch it until like just get the items, and then they can just win the game from outscaling. Right. I think against a Chinese team, this can lead to problems, especially EDG that seems to be pretty good at the game and improving from the group stage. I wouldn't take, even though the series against RNG was not that great quality, I would never underestimate Chinese teams after a quarterfinals, but usually this is where they start shining. But I would say no. I would say T1 and Damwon are on another level, and then you have Genji that seems to be more an underdog in this tournament.
Want to see more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, be a pleb and don't.